welcome back to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. Today I'm joined by Joe Setyen on my right, the deputy managing editor of Story at the Western Journal. On my left, I'm joined by Michael Austin, a crack reporter at the Western Journal, and I am another Cracker Jack reporter at the Western Journal, Andrew J. Shasha. Today, we've got a hot show for you guys. We're going to be talking about...
A hot show?
A hot show.
Never heard that one
It is
before.
spicy. It is going to be a fantastic show. We're talking today about Mr. Cuomo in New York, Andrew Cuomo, the governor, and his sexual assault scandal. Harassment scandal, that is still ongoing. We'll be talking about Nancy Pelosi and the Biden border crisis, just how wrong the Democrats have that. And we'll also be talking about the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to stomp on democracy in Hong Kong. But first, we're going to start with Joe today. But before all of that conversation is going to be brought to you by Patriot Depot, one of our friends and partners who have sponsored this episode. You can check out patriotdepot.com for all of your supplies for the conservative revolution. And with that, we're going to talk about Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about Andrew Cuomo. As of today, as of when we're airing this live, I think 7 women have now accused the New York governor, of various degrees of sexual harassment, misconduct. Some of the things are quite serious. I mean, all of the allegations are quite serious, but there's probably varying degrees of the severity of his alleged actions there. And I just kind of want to point out talk about the double standard that's going on, right? And I'm not breaking any new ground here. We know that, the left, we have seen many people on the left attack Governor Cuomo and say he should resign for this. But we've also seen a lot of people showing him the due process that they did not give other people like, say, Brett Kavanaugh. I do want to bring to mind one specific example. President Joe Biden said of the allegations against Cuomo, and I quote, "I think the investigation is underway and we should see what it brings us." Now, Joe Biden said in 2018 in the midst of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, and he was referring specifically to Anita Hill, but his comments were somewhat general. He said, "For a woman to come forward in the glaring lights of focus nationally, you've got to start off with the presumption that at least the essence of what she's talking about is real, whether or not she forgets facts, whether or not it's been made worse or better over time." The final quote that I want to bring up is Governor Cuomo himself in 2018 referring to Brett Kavanaugh. And he said, "Only a political skeptic could find a reason to disbelieve her." And he also said, "To Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and all survivors of sexual assault, we believe you and we will fight for you." So I think the double standard is pretty glaring, right? When it is someone you disagree with, and Democrats did not like now Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, they were quick to say, "Oh, these women ought to be believed. We must believe all women, and this man must never be on the Supreme Court." When it comes to Cuomo, and credit to some Democrats for being ideologically consistent, Kirsten Gillibrand, AOC, people like that, at least they're being consistent. But you've seen other people like Joe Biden, a bunch of other Democrats who have basically said, let the investigation play out. And of course, they're right? We should support due process. Yeah. I kind of want to ask you guys, why do you think there is this double standard?
Well, the Me Too movement, there was a lot of good that could have come from that, but it was just used as a political tool. Like that's what the whole thing was for the left. It was used as a tool to out the people that they wanted to out. It was used as a tool to further third wave feminism and all these ideas about, men and women not just being equal, but being treated the same, and basically just tearing down men. And so because it was used as a political tool, now that it's coming back around, well, we don't want to use it against ourselves. So it's pretty simple. And, I don't want to, you don't want to attribute motives to everyone. There are plenty of people on the left that have legitimate feelings about Me Too, and they really wanted to, do some good with that. But there were also plenty that were willing and able to weaponize that against whoever they saw fit. So we're seeing just the reverse, and them going like, well, we can't use this as a tool against ourselves, so now it's time to back off.
Yeah, it's almost a political commonplace in the United States at this point in the current political climate that these things just end up becoming something that you regret in the future. I mean, we heard, and we've heard on multiple occasions Senate Majority Leader, now Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on the Republican side kind of confront Democrats with the idea that some of their more aggressive political tactics will come back to bite them. And that's something that we're seeing now. Unfortunately, I think, with the Me Too movement, we saw an incredibly important moment in the Hollywood community with some, positively heinous behavior, decades of it being called out, and the right people getting put on blast. And that same thing should happen in the political sphere if certain figures have been found to be doing those things. But when you throw due process out the window, you set up for a horrible, horrible situation. Something I want to point out there, or pull out of that quote that you brought up, was the idea of you would have to be a political skeptic to question someone's motive in coming forward in this. That's an important thing. Our whole political system, our whole justice system is built on the idea of skepticism, because that due process is so important. And so when we talk about political skepticism, on the other end of that is the political cynicism that we have seen kind of just pervade the system in recent years, with these cynics deciding that, well, we will stomp on skepticism if it means that we can get ahead politically.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point, Andrew, and it kind of leads me into my next question, which is, how do we, in good faith, deal with allegations of this sort? So let's take Andrew Cuomo, right? I don't think any of us are, I don't think it's controversial to say, look, he's a guy who conservatives, lovers of liberty everywhere, libertarians like myself, we don't like him, right? I don't like him because he hates liberty, he hates freedom, he is very, very, very pro-abortion. His administration led to, I think, deaths of many people in nursing homes, and then he tried to cover it up. So I don't like him for many, many reasons. But how do we sort of, I think there's a tendency sometimes that you see a person you don't like Cuomo, and then more bad things are said about them, like sexual misconduct. And then there's probably a tendency to believe them. How do you parse that? Because, to take another example with Brett Kavanaugh, right, you had a bunch of people, or three people, accusing him of misconduct, and we say, yeah, due process is good. So how do we sort of parse that? Because due process, I think, is good in all cases, but then it seems like, there's some instances, like with Kavanaugh, they were accusing him of these ridiculous things, and, everyone around him said, no, this is a good guy, right? With Cuomo, it's, 7 women who have made some credible accusations. It's sort of been backed up by a lot of people around Cuomo saying, look, this guy is the worst, and we all knew it. How do we parse that? What do we believe and what don't we believe? And, it's doubtful that any of these women's claims will ever be proven in a court of law, but that doesn't mean they're lying. And then kind of the similar with Kavanaugh, where it's like, I think he was innocent of those allegations, but if we're going to say that Cuomo's guilty, but that Kavanaugh's innocent, how do we parse that?
Yeah, no,
I'm done talking now, so you guys can get into it.
Conservatives set a standard, and I believe the right standard in 2018, and even before that with Clarence Thomas and those proceedings that we got at with Biden. Now, that standard got set, and that standard, it has to be kept. We have to stick to our guns with the due process claim. So that means that, though it may be politically advantageous to say, oh, well, Cuomo's got to go, we can't give into that impulse. And I think when it comes to just handling this situation on a broader kind of scale, like you're talking about, we need to introduce some nuance to this discussion. It's something Americans hate to hear on both sides.
Yeah.
They hate to hear it. They question any opportunity to bring it. But that means, justice can mean different things in different avenues. That can mean, socially, justice can mean that, maybe not believe all women, but hear all women, and hear all women compassionately. Hear any man who comes forward with these same claims. Anyone who comes forward, we need to hear them compassionately. We need to give them an opportunity to voice their grievances, to voice, the things that have come up in their lives. And then we need to hear those claims honestly, and we need to assess the evidence that we've been given, and we need to make judgments. That means that, the media hates to do this, but they need to wait to pass judgment until things like, in a court of law, it is decided that justice is very different. That due process justice that we're talking about in a court of law is very different. It's much harder to come by, which is, in certain cases with heinous crimes, very unfortunate. But there can be justice sought in other avenues, but the media needs to decide, hey, we're not going to stomp all over due process and say someone is guilty because we feel it's advantageous, and we need socially for more compassion to be brought to the dialogue. And I think, unfortunately, we have a really hard time diverting into various avenues when we have those discussions.
And the media is the complicating factor in this equation. They're making this really difficult to just stand by the due process standard. And I've seen other tactics taken on by a lot of people on the right as well. Like, oh well, if there's a certain number of accusers, then we know that probably something happened. But even then, it's just opening up the environment to like, well, if we get a bunch of people together and we all accuse someone, then we can get them fired from their job.
And I do think it's like a case-by-case thing. I will say on that sort of note, right? So in the Bible it says, 2 or 3 witnesses are needed to sort of accuse someone of wrongdoing. And obviously in cases like sexual misconduct, there's only going to be 1 witness for each instance of that. In most cases, that is by its nature a private thing, and wrongdoers will use private moments to use that. That being said, I do think there's something to be said for, okay, there's 7 witnesses. One of them seems like she has a political axe to grind. The other ones maybe don't really, as opposed to, I keep bringing up the Kavanaugh example again. You had one person who seemed somewhat credible, though her story seemed to fall apart. You had 2 more people who seemed like they weren't credible at all. So I think there is something to be said for, the number of credible accusations.
Yeah,
right?
credible. And
credible, independent accusations.
And what we're weighing that on, though, is the credibility of each of those, too.
You're absolutely right.
So,
and I think that when we get into these discussions, there's kind of a tendency to talk about, what can we do after the fact. We need to start addressing what can we do before the fact. We need to start changing behavior, start changing minds, and we need to stop making fun of folks like
Pence.
Exactly what I was going at.
Yeah.
Mike Pence was someone who was raked over the coals in the public opinion because he said, I don't have meals alone with women. My wife has to be there. Now, we can say maybe we don't want, that's not a rule that everyone's going to go by. It's not realistic to expect everyone to live by that.
But if you want to go by that rule,
then you should not be harassed for it. You should not be made fun of for it.
Not discouraging that behavior.
Exactly.
That was a lot funnier before Me Too came up and before Andrew Cuomo got, accused of all these things, and all of these men who, are facing these allegations. That's his way of staying out of it. That's
ensuring that is not going to happen. That situation isn't raised. And if we care about accountability and transparency in government, that's something that we should kind of expect in these offices. Why are people hanging out one-on-one in these government offices? We should be, the legislative process, the executive process, these people should be working, in groups, and they should be kind of avoiding that, as private as possible affairs in these offices. They're doing the people's work. They should do it transparently, and they should be doing it, effectively.
Yeah. I'll bring up the example of my church where both of us go to, but they have a rule: they will not have any 2 staff members, a man and a woman, together in private alone. And I'm not saying that politics is church. You can't you can't say that, but there's a reason that exists, right? If anyone brings up any accusations, that stuff is one, you're avoiding temptation whatsoever, and number 2, you are covering yourself because you can. If someone has false allegations, then you could say, but we don't have this situation in the first place. So, and I'm explaining that bad.
Yeah, but. And at the Western Journal and at WJ Live, we come at things from a Christian perspective, and one thing. A lot that's lost on a lot of Christians and lost on a lot of people that don't really understand the Bible is that there's right and wrong, but then there's also wise and unwise. And your behavior should be wise, and you're not, having lunch with a woman alone, that's not necessarily immoral, but it can necessarily be unwise.
Is it a good idea? Maybe not.
And that's
exactly
the left by having, and we're talking about Democrats when we talk about the left in the United States, but the kind of broader cultural left has this weird idea that because something is realistic, even if it is not positive, it must be kind of shirked. So this idea that, well, shouldn't we just want a world where a man and a woman can sit down and nothing might ever happen? And it's like, well, yes, that would be wonderful. I would love to live in that world, but that's not realistic. And when the left comes at these conversations, with an ideology ready to go, and they come at these conversations unwilling to accept the facts and ready to twist the foundations on which the discussion is had. Michael, you're going to get to that in a minute with this immigration thing. The left completely destroys the ability to have a reasonable, realistic discussion.
Yeah.
That's a great segue.
Yeah. And so, we see that also with Pelosi. She did a recent interview with ABC News where she was talking about the crisis they're having at the border right now with all of the immigrant children coming in. Reports have been coming out this past couple weeks, that the facilities they have for immigrant children just are not able to hold all of them. Some of them don't. There's reports coming out that some of them don't have enough food, and so all these problems. And we're seeing a huge surge in the number of children coming across. And so, Pelosi was asked about this on ABC, and she essentially, all of the answers she gave were completely false. And we're going to play one clip for you right now about that.
It is. Actually, the facts are these. There are more children, about 600-700 more children, unaccompanied children, coming over the border. This is a humanitarian challenge to all of us. What the administration has inherited is a broken system at the border, and they are working to correct that in the children's interest.
Not a crisis, it's a challenge.
Yeah, so 600-700 children. She doesn't say what length of time that's over or anything. Nobody has any idea where those numbers are coming from. What the actual number is that through February into March, there have been 337 children per day that have come across unaccompanied, come across the border. And so we've had to try to find holding facilities for all of those people. And furthermore, she mentioned there how they inherited a broken system. And that's kind of laughable given that, Andrew, you're doing a series right now, Erasing the Line, basically about how Biden is tearing down everything that Trump had. Biden is making the border less secure, which is leading to this problem. So saying that, it's because of Trump. Well, you took away everything Trump did to prevent this.
I will say, maybe this is not the time for
go ahead.
going back and forth, but to an extent, she's right in that the border, the immigration system has been broken for decades.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, certainly.
Every president
Trump didn't fix it. Bush didn't fix it. Clinton didn't fix it. It's a stupid argument to make because literally every president has inherited a broken immigration system.
Yes.
And very few presidents. Trump, you can say with the wall and with certain border security things, no president has found the magic solution.
No.
Yeah.
And I doubt that Joe Biden will.
And that's great that you bring that up, Joe, because that I could clarify a little further. What she's being asked about is not why the situation at the border is so bad. Basically, what she's being asked is why is it getting so much worse under Biden? Because even George Stephanopoulos, when he's asking her about it, he's comparing it. He's saying these are worse than any of the numbers we've had under Trump. And so that's what they're asking her about. And she's saying, well, we've had a broken system. That's why it's getting so much worse. And it's like, well, you're moving away from the system that was producing less numbers of this severity. And so then we have a second clip from this interview as well.
So this, again, is a transition for what was wrong before to what is right. Of course, we have to also look to Central America and Mexico and the rest. The corruption, the violence, all of that so bad. My most recent trip to the Northern Triangle, that would be Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, you saw the impact of the climate change, mind you. These people were leaving because of the drought. They couldn't farm, and they were seeking other ways to survive. So there are many reasons that go into this, but the fact is we have to deal with it at the border. And some of the people coming there are seeking asylum. And I always like to quote our friends in the evangelical movement. At one of our rump hearings we had before we had the majority, the representative said to us, the United States Refugee Resettlement Program is the crown jewel of American humanitarianism. So we have certain responsibilities that we must honor. We have to have a system that accommodates that, and that is what the Biden administration is in the process of doing.
And so she's making the emotional argument there that we should take in those that are seeking asylum, and there is some truth to that. However, what's happening right now is the Democrats are arguing that anyone who says that they're seeking asylum should just be admitted immediately, and that's causing just all these problems that we're having right now and just an influx that we can't quite deal with. Yeah. And, we should be trying to help those that we can help that are looking for help, but also that shouldn't come at the detriment to the rest of the American people. And just to circle back a little bit, God forbid I say the word circle back, but just in case people weren't clear on exactly what policies Biden had kind of has been removing so far. You could probably speak to this too, Andrew. But, you know, first off, they just immediately halted construction of the border wall, which has kind of opened up a lot of opportunities for illegal immigrants to cross over. And second off, they ended the, I believe, remain in Mexico policy. So basically, those seeking asylum would have to remain in Mexico while they're waiting, you know, waiting their day in court. And instead, by revoking that, all of those people, you're going to seek asylum? Okay, come hang out until your court date. And oftentimes, they never show up for their court date. So, yeah.
I mean, that's to get at the abuse. So often when Democrats talk about, well, most of the illegal immigration in the United States isn't actually at the southern border. It's visa overstays.
Right.
Okay, well, if we want to hold that that is the fact, and many reports do actually indicate that that is the fact, but if we want to hold those as the facts, then saying that folks can, you know, reside inside the United States unaccompanied throughout their day in court would mean that those people are essentially in the same situation as visa overstays, where they have free reign over, you know, an opportunity to live in the United States and go where they please. They don't need to show up to court again.
Right.
They can just dodge and duck the system. So you're opening up, you know, from the border wall to instances like that, you're opening up huge arrays of opportunity. I want to get at the idea that also Pelosi's conversation about, you know, how many folks it is and how it's worse because Trump made it worse. Well, if that were the case, you know, one of the kind of facts of causality is that the time order has to make sense. It has to come, you know, one thing has to make sense being first and causing the thing that happened after. Now, if Trump was to blame for all of this, would the numbers not have risen kind of maybe rapidly or even, you know, slowly throughout the course of Trump's presidency, which we did not see? Instead, it's at the moment that Joe Biden takes office, issues numbers of sweeping executive actions on immigration, and then promises all outright amnesty to the vast majority of 11 to 22 million illegal immigrants who are in this country. There is absolutely no question that this is a political opportunity. There is no question that they have been caught with their pants down on the left in terms of being told for years that they're going to fix these problems. If we win this election, we were told for months last year, this was going to be one of the first items on the docket. Well, guess what? By giving that promise, you're promising a lot of people who would love a better life and who my heart goes out to those folks.
Yes.
I would understand,
Definitely.
and if I lived in another country, I would love to live in the United States. That's where I would be looking to go. But you are opening up an opportunity with those promises, and he's absolutely to blame. The fact that they can't even say the word crisis, it's a humanitarian challenge. Barack Obama called it a crisis. It's a crisis.
Yeah.
It's been a crisis.
And one other number to inform this discussion is that, you know, the peak number of children that came over the border under Trump, it was in February of 2019. It was 5,900 children in 1 month. And in the first full month of the Biden administration, 7,000 children. So 1,100 more children. Like, it's a huge percentage increase have come over. So,
and if you want to provide a better life to these folks, you know, incentivizing one of the most dangerous treks, you know, with no food, no water, no opportunity between whatever Central American country you are coming from to the United States, potentially by way of folks who are human trafficking, you're not opening up a positive opportunity for these people.
What we need to do, and it just, because what you said, Andrew, is absolutely correct, right? We need, you understand what these people are coming from. I do not blame any of the children who are in detention centers. They're coming with their parents.
Of course
their
not,
parents, if you're a parent and you're bringing your child, you know, to America, your conditions where you are must be the worst, right? So I really do sympathize with that. I think it's important to empathize with the situation that they face. The problem is that the Biden administration has sent out very mixed messaging on this, right? They've basically tried to say, look, don't come over, but they're also saying, you know, we want you to be able to come over, and, you know, it's not very good. The issue is the legal immigration system, and I think it always is going to come back to this, because if you can fix the legal immigration system, which is terrible, Republicans know that, Democrats know that, it is really, really bad.
Expensive, messy,
years long. It takes years and years, you know, to actually legally migrate to the United States. And I'm of the opinion, many conservatives disagree with me, I think immigrants help a country. For the most part, I think they help build it. I think they help the economy. Regardless, we are pro-legal immigration, I think all of us.
Absolutely.
Right? You have to fix it, because the reason these people illegally try to, you know, enter the United States is because it's so difficult for them to do it legally. And so I'm not saying that we just leave it and we let whoever wants to come in. I think there's room for border security. I think what you have to do, and it gets to the heart of the matter, is fix the legal immigration system. Then they will not be incentivized to make this dangerous track and to try to cross the border. They will do it legally, and we need to fix that system.
So it seems like oftentimes this discussion between Republicans and Democrats, it starts and ends over border security. Yeah. And that's all that's ever discussed, and that's all that's ever gone back and forth between when the other group takes power. Do you think if we refocused efforts on just cleaning up the immigration process rather than worrying about just mainly, okay, let's make the border more secure, do you think that would have an effect that would end up cleaning up a lot of these things if we just kind of shifted focus towards that?
I do think, well, the issue is you have to realize how long is it going to take, right? Yeah. So cleaning up the legal immigration process, I think you can do that. The problem is just Republicans and Democrats don't want to do that. Right. I think if you did that quickly, then you don't really have a border security problem as much anymore. I do think there's room for border security. I'm not, necessarily an open borders libertarian, but the way to solve it, it takes care of the rest of the problems with it, is to make it so that you can legally come to the U.S. And I think, maybe there's something to be said for, you can't really deport the 11 to 22 million illegal immigrants who are currently in the country. How do you deal with them? That is a whole other issue. But you see, the problem is all of these things are intertwined, right? And it takes so much work around to try to figure out, okay, how do you solve it? That's why it's been a problem for decades, because you have all of these moving targets at play, and no one is, interested in fixing all of them. They're just like, well, maybe we can, pretend that we're going to do this, or, the Democrats are going to promise, they're going to fix everything, but we know they're not actually interested in doing that. And shame on them, honestly. Shame on the Democrats. Shame on all the politicians for the decades who have promised to fix the system and haven't.
I was about to say, shame on all of these folks who, the conversation, like you were saying, Michael, absolutely right. It dies on a series of maybe 2 or 3 hills every single time it comes up, and one of those hills is always sovereignty. It is always, a question of, Republicans will come to the table if the Democrats will allow for a conversation of to what degree does America get to express its sovereignty in illegal immigration. A lot of conservatives, myself included, I would be happy to see a system by which, most of these folks can be, brought into the United States, not folks who are not here yet, but the folks who are currently residing here to be brought in and normalized in the United States. That should happen. I don't know about fully naturalized. I don't think voting rights for folks who, abused a system of illegal immigration. That's a different question. But people would come to the table if sovereignty was on the table. If the idea that, okay, well, we can address this, we can address the folks who have abused the system so far and kind of work people into the culture and into the nation. But our borders matter, our laws matter, and from here on out, we need to have a set, strong system for illegal immigrants so that way those legal avenues being easier to kind of navigate is not a huge problem. Another country that is facing massive sovereignty problems right now, or I guess not a country, but an autonomous little zone in China, is Hong Kong. Now, the city, as not a lot of people are familiar, but we have seen over the last 2 years quite a bit of, for lack of a better word, there have been conflict between these two locations, between the Chinese government and between the city of Hong Kong, which was initially, the Brits gave up the land in Hong Kong, and they said that, it was going to be self-sustaining, and it was going to be able to make its own decisions for a period of about 5 decades, and then it would be absorbed into China. The people of Hong Kong do not like that idea, and we have seen them conflict with the Chinese Communist Party over the last couple of years. On an international scale, it has drawn international pressure and international conversation, the riots and protests in the city of Hong Kong. Recently, China has decided to put the screws to Hong Kong once again and kind of handicap one of the last opportunities at democracy in that small zone, and it is by undercutting the democratic system in that city with a new set of election rules. Now, what I want to focus on here is the National People's Congress of China. Our reporter, Brett Kershaw, one of our younger reporters, an intern, has been doing some awesome in-depth coverage, and he is going to be releasing a piece later today or possibly tomorrow morning on these developments. Beijing has essentially decided that they are going to rapidly increase the election committee in Hong Kong so that Chinese patriots and Beijing loyalists can have a bigger seat at the table in the Hong Kong government. And that essentially just means pushing so that the city can eventually be absorbed into China. What that means is that they're going to be adding a new voting block from the 4 voting blocks that were currently on that elections committee to a 5th voting block of 300 seats. It's going to match all the other voting block sizes and expand the voting coalition to 1,500 seats with 300 Beijing-selected loyalists.
Wow, shocking.
We talk about packing the courts here in the United States. They are attempting to pack the system in Hong Kong without question. And so what I kind of wanted to get at is another point of weakness for the Biden administration stepping into office. We have seen that Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and the Biden administration do not have a comprehensive policy on China, despite the fact that both Barack Obama and far more aggressively Donald Trump set China as, the new point of conflict on the world stage, no question about it. So Anthony Blinken, in response to some of these actions recently, asked before the by the Republican Representative Brian Fitzpatrick in Congress, asked what would constitute a hostile act. His response was fairly strange. Well, I think we've seen actions of deep concern in Hong Kong by Beijing, starting with the national security law that you know well. And then the actual implementation of that law to quash democracy in Hong Kong and to renege on commitments that China made when Hong Kong was handed over. Those principles, those commitments, I think, have been clearly and egregiously violated. He went on to say that essentially the Biden policy on Hong Kong is still, on China is still developing, and that the United States will continue to work with, quote, like-minded countries on the international stage. That's not answering the question. That's not answering the question. The idea that we're going to work with like-minded countries on the world stage, a truism, just, nice words and weasel words, for lack of a better term. The real question is, these folks have come into office. They're not ready to address China. They're not ready to, kind of posture against China. But kind of with this policy coming up, is it concerning that they're not ready? Or is it concerning that they're going to be developing their policy for China on the fly, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, it's as concerning as, I think when you're dealing with countries, having relationships with other countries, I think there's always an extent of, you just kind of have to see what happens. I think that's kind of the nature of foreign policy. Yes, I would like to see something more structured, something where they actually know what they are doing. I don't think they are ready to face China. I don't think they're going to do a very good job facing China. I'm just kind of, the maybe with the exception of President Trump, American foreign policy has not been very good. And I just see this as sort of a continuation of that. And, maybe this isn't the best thing to say, but we haven't had any wars, with major superpowers in a pretty long time. So I don't think that, any war or anything is going to happen out of it. I do think that they're not equipped to, deal with the rising threat of China. It's politics as usual. I don't think politics as usual should be good enough for anyone. No. But it's just the same boring, we'll deal with them and like-minded individuals, and China, and we're very bad, and we'll figure strongly worded statements, all that stuff. It's just politics as usual.
Some sort of small tariff or something. Yeah, that'll show them.
Yeah, we'll put sanctions. They are going to impose sanctions.
Yes,
that always works.
Yes,
and that kind of actually gets at what my second question before we close is essentially that we have seen that there have been no major wars with, other superpowers in quite some time. There's been no World War III, despite conversations at the turn of 2020 with Iran.
When we thought that was the craziest thing that was going to happen in 2020.
What a year. We live in a world where mutually assured destruction is absolutely assured. At this point, it is assured. Major international players are not going to war directly. There's a lot of proxy conflict, a lot of posturing. But the question then becomes, how can anyone kind of put the screws to China or face up to China at this point? Do you continue with a Trumpian policy, or do you kind of go back to the Bush era, Obama era? Joe Biden and Mr. Blinken have said essentially their policy is they're going to go to the UN and they're going to address it at the UN. There's no accountability at the UN. I'd love to point out the fact that China is in fact one of the major players at the UN. They sit a number of incredibly dominant committees there. So how do you address this issue? Do you continue with the tariffs and with the sanctions, or do you find a stronger policy?
I mean, foreign policy is definitely not my area of expertise. At the very least, you should keep sanctions. You should keep doing what you can. And I do think rhetorically, one thing that is very important is that we make the American public aware of what China is. Because I think very often most people in America aren't educated on what the Communist Party of China is actually about, how they do restrict freedoms over there. And oftentimes, we see that with the NBA and with Disney. We see companies kind of standing with them and going like, oh yeah, it's just another country. They're just doing what they can. And what that leads to is people not realizing the horrors and the crimes going on in China and the freedoms that are being restricted, not only of those in Hong Kong or of the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region, but also of just the Chinese people in general.
So. It's not a free country.
No.
By no means. Even if you are let's say you're a middle class or, upper middle class Chinese person, you are not free.
Yeah.
They don't believe in free speech. They don't have that there. Their version of free speech is you can say anything you want unless it's going to cause controversy, and then you don't have the right to say it because the country's interests come over your interests. So, yeah, it's just a different worldview, and I think what you said, Michael, is so important. It's making people aware. I don't like cancel culture, right? At all. Cancel culture is bad, but I think there is something to be said for making people aware. Hey, Disney and the NBA are in bed with these monsters, right? And that's not canceling them. That's just making people aware of, look who these people are doing business with. And I think that can help sort of address the problem because, you don't want to do business with Nazis, right? And I'm not saying I don't like comparing things to Nazis, but these people have these horrific human rights abuses, right? Millions of people in concentration camps.
Yes. All
All of these awful, awful things. They have secret police. I assume they have secret police, but they have police who will, come and get you if you say things that they don't like. They, hid the origins of the coronavirus. These are bad people, right? And this is a country run by bad people. So I think it is good to make people in America aware of how bad they are, so that when they see American businesses doing, playing ball with the Chinese Communist Party, they can be like, no, I don't want that. That's not good.
And at the end of the Trump administration, we saw a little bit of that with them, with Trump calling them out for the coronavirus, but also with them officially declaring what's going on in Xinjiang, what's going on with the Uyghur people, a genocide, officially, the U.S. State Department. But, I can't really give the Trump administration too much credit for that because it just seemed like they already knew that they were going to change administrations. It was just a last-ditch effort. But what we need is more of that. Like, if we can't really take on China, but we can make people aware of what they're doing.
Right.
And, I think that's the best way to step forward. And I don't see Joe Biden doing that whatsoever with the way that he's been talking about cultural relativism and, China's doing their thing and we just got to do our best. No, that's not good enough. We can be realistic in saying, there's not a lot we can do, but you can also call them out for what they're doing.
So what I'm seeing, as we tend to see in a conversation tempered by the resident libertarian Joe Setyan, is we're seeing kind of a private approach at this table. And if you are interested in keeping up with that private approach, keeping people aware, keeping people educated on major players in the current climate, dangerous players, folks like big tech, folks like China, folks like some of the Democrats that we see in Congress, and even some of the Republicans that we've seen mess up quite a bit in Congress. If you'd like to keep up with any of that, if you would like to be sharing our content to make sure that your friends are keeping up with any of that, keep it here with WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. If you want to support us, we are here every day, every weekday at the very least, 2 p.m. Pacific and 5 p.m. Eastern. We are on YouTube. If you're not watching us on YouTube, you're going to want to go to YouTube. You're going to want to find WJ Live, and you're going to want to hit subscribe. That little subscribe, that red button down there, when that gets clicked, you're going to want to hit the bell that pops up next to it, because the bell is going to ensure that you never miss an episode, that every time that we go live, it goes to your inbox. You get a notification, no matter what big tech players want to stop you from getting that piece of information. Otherwise, you can go to westernjournal.com/newsletters, and you can sign up for our newsletters, and you can get direct to your email inbox all of our articles, episodes, videos. All that content is going to be coming through your email. If you want to watch us anywhere else, not particularly fond of the video format, don't want to see these ugly mugs every day, then you can keep up with us where you find your audio content at iHeart, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you find your podcasts. We are most definitely there, or we are trying to get there. Otherwise, for our audio listeners, again, you can go and support our journalism at westernjournal.com/join. We have a number of tiers for folks who want to subscribe and be part of our community here at the Western Journal. You can keep up with our journalism, all of our original reports. We may soon be seeing some exclusive content for members in the coming weeks and months. So keep it right here at Western Journal at WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Hey guys, huge story. We need a fresh card. Let's red label it. Roll as fast as we can.
All right, on it. Sounds good. All right, guys, we got a red label breaking story. Can we get a picture for that? And can we try to get that out in the next 20 minutes? I want eyes on it as soon as possible.
On it, Joe. 2 more minutes and we'll be live.
Sam, we're going to need a slot for that story, so figure out what you want to bump. Ashley, we're going to want it translated into Spanish yesterday.
Sí, señor. We can slide it in at 2:30. It should be going out here in about 10 minutes.